They said a boy who leaves the system at 18 with nothing but a worn-out bag and the ghost of a name is already a failure. What he found on a forgotten piece of land, however, wasn't just a home. It was a history, a fight, and a reason to prove them all wrong. And if you've ever felt like your story was written for you by someone else, then stick around, because this is about tearing up that page and starting your own chapter. Hit that subscribe button if you believe in second chances, because that's what this whole journey is about. The hinges of the great iron gate shrieked like something dying as it closed behind me. For 16 years, that sound had been the punctuation mark to every supervised outing, every temporary departure. Now it was a period at the end of a sentence I hadn't written. I stood on the cracked pavement, the February air so cold it felt like a slap. Behind me, in the long gravel driveway of the St. Jude's Home for Boys, I could hear their laughter. Not all of them, not even most, but the ones who mattered, the ones whose voices could find the cracks in your armor. They were laughing. "Look at him," Marco's voice carried thin and sharp in the wind. "King of nothing, off to rule his kingdom of pavement." I didn't turn around. Turning around was a confession of weakness. I just clutched the strap of my canvas bag, the one thing in the world that was entirely mine, and kept my eyes on the grimy city bus sighing at the curb. Inside the bag was everything I owned. 2 changes of clothes, a worn copy of a book about stars, a toothbrush, and $74 in cash. My emancipation stipend, they called it. A laughable sum meant to launch me into a world I'd only ever seen through reinforced windows. Mrs. Gable, the home's director, had handed it to me in a thin white envelope, her face a mask of professional pity. "Leo," she'd said, her voice dry as old paper, "the world is not kind. Be practical, be quiet, you'll do fine." It wasn't advice, it was a warning, a command to remain invisible, just as I had been for most of my life inside her institution. Along with the cash, she gave me another envelope, thicker and made of a stiff, cream-colored paper that felt ancient. It had my full name typed on it, Leonardo Abram Novak, a name I rarely used. At St. Jude's, you were your last name or a nickname or just you. "This came for you," she'd explained, her disinterest a shield. "From a law firm, something about your grandfather." I stared at the envelope. Grandfather. The official story, the one in my thin, sanitized file, was that my parents had died in a car crash when I was 2. No other family. I was a ward of the state, a loose thread in the fabric of society. The idea of a grandfather was like a phantom limb, a connection I never knew I was missing. I didn't open it there. I didn't want to give Marco or anyone else the satisfaction of seeing my reaction, whether it was disappointment or a flicker of hope. I just nodded, tucked it into the inner pocket of my coat, and walked out. The laughter followed me, a bitter chorus at my back. The bus ride was a blur of gray buildings and faces that looked as tired as I felt. I clutched the envelope through the fabric of my coat, the sharp corner digging into my ribs. It was a tangible piece of a mystery, a connection to a past I'd been told didn't exist. I found a cheap room in a boarding house that smelled of stale cigarettes and boiled cabbage, the kind of place where men went to disappear. For the first 2 days, I did nothing. I lay on the lumpy mattress, staring at the water-stained ceiling, the $74 feeling less like a fresh start and more like a countdown timer. The laughter from the gates of St. Jude's echoed in the quiet room. King of nothing. Maybe they were right. Maybe this was it. A dingy room, a dwindling pile of cash, and a future as gray as the winter sky. On the 3rd morning, my hand closed around the envelope in my coat pocket. It was either this or surrender. My fingers, clumsy with a mixture of fear and anticipation, tore it open. The letterhead was embossed. Davies and Finch, attorneys at law. The words were dense, legalistic, but the gist was clear. A man named Elias Novak, my paternal grandfather, had passed away. He had left me, his sole heir, his entire estate. The word estate sounded grand, conjuring images of mansions and rolling hills. But the letter was quick to temper any such fantasy. The estate consisted of a single property, a 150-acre homestead in a place I'd never heard of, called Havenwood Valley, some 5 hours north by bus. The property, the letter stated soberly, was in a state of considerable disrepair and came with 3 years of unpaid property taxes, amounting to just over $5,000. A hollow laugh escaped me, sounding strange in the silent room. An inheritance, a debt, of course. The universe had a sick sense of humor. The letter concluded by requesting my presence at their office to discuss the disposition of the asset, a phrase that sounded both clinical and final. It was clear what they expected. They expected me to sell. A boy with $74 doesn't keep a dilapidated farm with a $5,000 lien against it. He sells it, takes whatever scraps are left after the taxes and fees, and is grateful for the small windfall. It was the practical, quiet thing to do. It was what Mrs. Gable would have advised. But something else was in the envelope. Tucked behind the legal document was a smaller, personal-sized envelope. The paper yellowed with age. My name was written on the front, not typed, but inscribed in a shaky yet elegant cursive. I opened it. Inside was a single heavy, old-fashioned iron key and a short, handwritten note. The ink was faded, a deep blue that had softened to gray in places. "Leo," it began, and the sight of my name written with such care made my throat tighten. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and the lawyers have found you. They will tell you to sell. They will speak of debt and disrepair. They will call it an asset. Do not listen. It is not an asset. It is a home. It is a story. Your story. Go there. The key is for the front door, but the real key is under the loose stone of the hearth. Go there, son, please." It was signed simply, Elias. Son. The word struck me with the force of a physical blow. No one had ever called me that. I read the note again, and then a third time. My hands were shaking. The lawyer's letter was a problem, a financial puzzle. This note was something else entirely. It was a plea, a promise. It was the first time in my life that anyone had asked me to do something not for my survival, but for a reason I couldn't yet understand. The laughter from St. Jude's seemed to fade, replaced by the quiet power of that single handwritten word, son. I looked at the iron key in my palm. It was heavy, ornate, from a time when things were built to last. I looked at my $74 spread out on the stained bedspread. It wasn't a countdown timer anymore. It was bus fare. The meeting with Mr. Davies was exactly as I'd expected. His office was on the 32nd floor of a glass tower that scraped the clouds. The view of the city was immense, a sprawling concrete jungle that made me feel smaller than ever. Mr. Davies himself was a man in his late 60s with kind eyes but a weary, pragmatic set. He wore a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than I'd see in a year. He didn't talk down to me, but he spoke with the gentle, inexorable logic of a man who deals in facts, not feelings. "Leonardo," he said, folding his hands on his vast mahogany desk, "your grandfather was a very determined man. He lived simply, some might say poorly. He was adamant that the property passed to you and only you." He slid a file across the desk. It was thin, just like my file at St. Jude's. "The situation is straightforward. The land is valuable, surprisingly so. A development firm, Northwood Holdings, has had a standing offer on it for years. They want to build a resort community." He named a number. It was a staggering amount of money, enough to buy a small apartment, a car, to live for years without the gnawing fear of hunger and homelessness that had been my constant companion. After the back taxes, the legal fees, the commissions, I would still walk away with a life-changing sum. It was the smart move, the only move. They've already contacted us again now that the estate can be settled. Mr. Davies continued, his tone patient. It's a clean, simple transaction. You sign the papers, and within 30 days you have a fresh start, a real one. He saw the hesitation on my face. Son, I understand the sentiment, but a piece of land you've never seen, a house that's likely barely standing. It's not a home, it's a burden. Elias, your grandfather, he was a good man, but he wasn't a practical one. He held on to that land with a stubbornness that bordered on irrational. I thought of the note, the plea. Go there, son. I thought of the iron key in my pocket. I want to see it first, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Mr. Davies sighed, a soft, disappointed sound. I was afraid you'd say that. Elias's blood runs strong in you, it seems. He leaned back in his chair. All right, but be prepared for what you'll find. It's been neglected for a long time. The valley is remote. The winters are harsh. It's no place for a young man alone. He gave me directions, a bus schedule, and the name of a man in the nearest town, a place called Silver Creek, who could drive me the last 10 miles to the property. As I stood to leave, he looked at me, his professional mask slipping for just a moment. Your grandfather loved that land more than anything. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for there, but I also hope you'll be sensible. The bus ride north was a journey through a changing world. The city's gray sprawl slowly gave way to suburbs, then to farmland, then to dense, rolling forests of pine and birch. The sky seemed to get bigger, the air cleaner. With every mile, I felt like I was shedding a layer of the city's grime, of St. Jude's oppressive silence. I was the only passenger who got off at Silver Creek, a town that looked like it had been plucked from a forgotten decade. The main street had a single gas station, a general store, and a diner with a flickering neon sign. The man Mr. Davies had told me to find, a grizzled old-timer named Gus, was waiting for me at the station in a pickup truck that looked as old and weathered as he was. You're the Novak boy? He grunted, looking me up and down. His eyes were sharp, assessing. I nodded. Figured. Got your granddad's eyes. He threw my bag in the back of the truck. Hop in. Road's rough this time of year. The 10 miles to the homestead were on a winding dirt road that climbed steadily into the mountains. The truck groaned and rattled, the suspension protesting every pothole. We didn't talk much. Gus seemed to be a man who believed words were a finite resource. Your granddad was a quiet man, he offered, as if reading my thoughts. Kept to himself, but he was good people. Helped me pull my truck out of a ditch one winter when no one else could get through. Strong old fella. The praise, simple and unadorned, felt like a small gift. Finally, Gus slowed the truck and pointed through the windshield. There she is, end of the line. I looked and my heart sank. Mr. Davies hadn't been exaggerating. The homestead was nestled in a small, secluded valley, flanked by towering pines. But the place itself was a picture of decay. The long driveway was choked with weeds. The 2-story farmhouse sagged in the middle, its porch roof tilting at a drunken angle. The paint had long since peeled away, leaving the wood a weathered silver gray. A large barn stood nearby, its great doors hanging off their hinges. The fields that stretched out behind the house were overgrown with brush and saplings. It looked abandoned, hopeless. The developer's offer echoed in my mind, a siren song of easy escape. This wasn't a home. It was a ruin. It was a burden. Gus must have seen the look on my face. She's a fixer-upper, that's for sure, he said, his voice softer than before. But Elias built her to last. Good bones. He always said the valley protects this place. He helped me get my bag out of the truck. Listen, kid, I'm back in town. You need anything, you call the general store. They know how to reach me. Don't be a stranger and don't be too proud to ask for help." He gave me a firm nod, climbed back into his truck, and rumbled away, leaving me in a profound and intimidating silence, broken only by the whisper of the wind through the pines. I was alone, truly alone, for the first time in my life. I walked up the overgrown path to the house, my boots crunching on dead leaves and fallen twigs. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, a clean, wild scent that was entirely alien to me. I reached the front door. It was solid oak, scarred by decades of weather. The keyhole was covered by a small, sliding brass plate. I took out the heavy iron key. It felt cold and real in my hand. For a moment, I hesitated. This was it, the point of no return. Signing the papers in Mr. Davies's office was one thing. That was abstract. This was real. Turning this key was choosing this path, this wreck of a house, this unknown story. I took a deep breath, slid the key into the lock, and turned. The mechanism, stiff from years of disuse, groaned in protest, then clicked with a satisfying finality. The door swung inward on silent, well-oiled hinges, opening into darkness. The air inside was stale and cold, thick with the dust of years, but it wasn't a dead smell. Underneath the dust, there was the faint, lingering scent of wood smoke and old books. I stepped inside, my eyes slowly adjusting to the gloom. The house was a time capsule. Furniture was draped in white sheets, ghostly shapes in the dim light. A thick layer of dust covered every surface. Sunlight struggled to pierce the grimy window panes, casting long, hazy beams through the air, illuminating dancing motes of dust. In the center of the main room was a massive stone fireplace, big enough to stand in. The hearth was made of wide, flat fieldstones. I walked over to it, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I remembered the note. "The real key is under the loose stone of the hearth." I knelt down, my heart pounding. I ran my hands over the stones, pushing and tapping, feeling for any sign of movement. Most were solid, cemented firmly in place, but one near the back corner shifted slightly under my weight. I dug my fingers into the crack around its edge and pulled. It was heavy, but it lifted out, revealing a dark, rectangular cavity beneath. My breath caught in my throat. Inside the hollow space was a metal box, about the size of a shoebox, rusted at the edges. It wasn't locked. With trembling hands, I lifted the lid. The box was filled with papers. On top was a thick stack of envelopes tied together with a faded piece of twine. They were addressed to me in the same elegant cursive as the first note. There were at least a dozen of them, each one numbered in the top corner. Beneath the letters was a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with the same handwriting, and under the journal, something that made the hair on my arms stand up, a folded, hand-drawn map of the property, and a thick manila envelope containing what looked like legal documents, newspaper clippings, and a series of black-and-white photographs. This was it. This was the story my grandfather had left for me. I picked up the first letter, marked with a number 1. I sat down on the dusty floor in a beam of pale sunlight and began to read. "My dearest Leo," it began, "if you are reading this, then you have made a choice. You chose to come here, to this place of ghosts and memories, instead of taking the easy path. I am proud of you for that. I knew you would. Stubbornness runs in our blood. First, there are things you must know, truths you were denied. Your parents did not die in a simple car accident. That was the story I gave the authorities, the story I created to protect you. Your father, my son, was an investigative journalist. A very good one. He was working on a story, a big one, about Northwood Holdings, the same company that wants to buy this land. He discovered they were cutting corners in their construction projects using substandard materials and, far worse, illegally dumping chemical waste from their processing plants into the local water table, right here in these mountains. My hands started to shake, the paper rattling softly in the silent house. He had evidence, proof. Your mother, an environmental scientist, was helping him analyze the water samples. They were going to expose the whole thing, but Northwood found out. They are not just a development company, Leo. They are ruthless. The car crash, it was no accident. The brakes were tampered with. It was a professional job, made to look like a tragic mistake. I was the one who found them. I was supposed to be meeting them that night to get a copy of their findings. I had to stop reading. A wave of nausea washed over me. I stood up and stumbled to the grimy window, gasping for air. The quiet valley outside, the peaceful trees, the rolling fields. It all looked different now, tainted by the secret it held. My parents, murdered. The story of my life, the simple, tragic tale of an orphan, was a lie, a carefully constructed wall to hide a monstrous truth. I looked back at the letter, at the neat, controlled script that conveyed a world of pain. I had to know the rest. I forced myself to sit back down and continue reading. I failed them, the letter went on. I couldn't protect my own son, but I swore I would protect you. They knew about you. They knew you existed. I was terrified they would come for you next, to silence the last link to my son. So I did the only thing I could think of. I made you disappear. I used every contact I had to create the story of the accident, to erase your connection to me and to your parents. I gave you up to the state, to the anonymity of the system, believing it was the only way to keep you alive. It broke my heart, Leo. Every single day for 16 years, it has been a wound that has not healed. I watched you from a distance through reports from a private investigator I hired. With the last of my savings, I saw your school photos. I read your report cards. I knew you were safe, but you were alone. And it was my fault. Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and silent, dripping onto the dusty floorboards. The grief was immense, a tidal wave of loss for parents I never knew, and a grandfather whose sacrifice I was only just beginning to understand. He hadn't abandoned me, he had hidden me. He had endured a lifetime of loneliness to keep me safe. The weight of his love, a love I had never known existed, was crushing and beautiful all at once. I wiped my eyes with the back of my sleeve and read the final paragraph. This land, this house, is all I have left to give you. It is your birthright, but it is also the heart of the fight. The evidence your father gathered is hidden here. Northwood still wants this land, not just for development, but to bury their crimes forever. They believe the proof died with your parents. They are wrong. It is here. And now it is yours. What you do with it is your choice. You can sell, take the money, and live a life of safety. I would not blame you. You have earned that peace. Or you can finish what your father started. You can seek justice, but know this: they are dangerous. This path is not safe. Whatever you choose, know that I have loved you every moment of every day. Your grandfather, Elias. I carefully folded the letter and placed it back in its envelope. The silence in the house was different now. It was no longer empty. It was filled with the presence of my family, with the echoes of their love and their courage. I looked at the pile of remaining letters, the journal, the map. This was more than an inheritance. It was a mission. The choice he had laid before me felt less like a choice and more like a calling. Sell? How could I sell this place, this monument to my family's sacrifice? How could I sell their story to the very people who had destroyed them? The money from Northwood Holdings, once a symbol of escape and freedom, now felt like blood money. It was the price of my silence. I spent the rest of the day exploring the house. My house. I pulled the sheets off the furniture, revealing sturdy, handcrafted wooden tables and chairs. I opened cupboards in the kitchen and found them stocked with canned goods and jars of preserves, as if my grandfather had expected me to arrive at any moment. The whole place was clean, orderly, just layered with dust. It was a home, waiting to be woken up. Upstairs, I found 2 bedrooms. One was clearly his, with a simple wooden bed, a bookshelf filled with worn paperbacks, and a window that looked out over the entire valley. The other room was empty, except for a small wooden crib in the corner. It was painted a cheerful yellow. My room. He had kept it for me all these years. That night I built a fire in the great stone fireplace, using wood my grandfather had stacked neatly on the porch. The flames pushed back the cold and the darkness, filling the room with a warm, flickering light. I ate a can of cold beans, the best meal I'd ever had. I didn't have a bed, so I took the cushions from the couch, piled them near the hearth, and wrapped myself in one of the dusty sheets. As I lay there, watching the fire dance, I thought about the sheer improbability of it all. 24 hours ago, I was an orphan with no past and no future. Now I was a son, a grandson, the heir to a legacy of love and a battle for justice. The weight of it was immense, but for the first time in my life, I didn't feel lost. I felt anchored. I had a name, I had a history, I had a home. And as I drifted off to sleep, the sounds of the old house settling around me like a comforting blanket, a new feeling began to take root in my chest. A feeling I hadn't allowed myself to have in a very long time. Hope. You know, it's a funny thing, the stories we tell ourselves. For 18 years, my story was that I was abandoned, unwanted, a piece of driftwood on the ocean of life. And I believed it. I let it define me, shape my expectations, limit my dreams. Finding that first letter from my grandfather didn't just change the facts of my past. It completely shattered the story I had built my identity on. It showed me that what I had perceived as abandonment was actually a desperate act of protection. What I saw as a curse was born from a deep, abiding love. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many of us are walking around, living out stories that aren't true? Stories we've been told by others, or worse, stories we've told ourselves about our own worth, our own capabilities, our own past. If you've made it this far into my story, maybe it's because some part of it resonates with you. Maybe you've also felt defined by a narrative that wasn't of your own making. I want you to take a moment and think about that. What is the story you tell yourself about you? And is it true? Is it the whole truth? Sometimes we have to be willing to metaphorically pry up the floorboards of our own lives to find the real story, the one that's been waiting there all along. It's not always easy, and it can be painful, but finding that truth is the only way we can ever truly be free, the only way we can start writing our own next chapter. Now, let's get back to the homestead, because my grandfather's first letter was just the beginning. The real secrets were still buried, waiting for me in the cold, hard ground of Havenwood Valley. The next morning, I woke to a world of white. A thick blanket of snow had fallen overnight, silencing the world and transforming the dilapidated homestead into something beautiful, almost magical. The sagging rooflines and weathered wood were softened by the snow, the flaws hidden under a pristine layer of white. It felt like a fresh start, a clean slate. I made a fire and read the second letter. It was less emotional, more practical. My grandfather, Elias, laid out the basics of survival on the homestead. He told me about the well out back with the hand pump, the location of the woodpile, the pantry stocked with enough non-perishables to last a winter. He even described how to work the old wood-burning stove in the kitchen. It was a manual for a life I'd never imagined, written by a man who had clearly poured all his love and foresight into preparing for my arrival. He also wrote about the land. "This valley isn't just dirt and trees, Leo," he wrote. "It's alive. Learn its rhythms. Watch the hawks that circle the ridge. Follow the deer trails down to the creek. The land will provide for you, But more than that, it will teach you. It will teach you patience, resilience, and strength. Everything you need to know is written in the seasons here. His words were almost poetic, and as I looked out the window at the snow-covered valley, I felt a deep, instinctual pull to what he was saying. This wasn't just property, it was a place with a soul. The end of the letter was more direct. The map I left you is important. Your father was methodical. He marked the locations of his water samples on it, but he also used it for something else. He was clever, always loved codes and puzzles as a boy. The real evidence, the physical proof he collected, documents, photographs, a ledger from a disgruntled Northwood employee, he hid it. He told me, "I've buried the truth in the heart of the valley. I believe the map holds the key to finding it. Study it. The answer is there." I spent the next several days settling in, following my grandfather's instructions. I learned the simple, rhythmic work of survival. I chopped wood, hauled water from the pump, and figured out the temperamental nature of the old stove. The physical labor was grounding. It cleared my head, and with every swing of the axe, I felt a little bit of the institutional pallor of St. Jude's falling away. I was becoming stronger, not just physically, but mentally. In the evenings, by the light of an old kerosene lamp I found, I would pore over the map. It was a detailed, hand-drawn topographical map of the 150 acres. It marked the house, the barn, the creek that snaked through the property, and the dense forest that surrounded it. Dozens of small X's were marked across it, mostly along the creek. These, I assumed, were my father's water sample sites. But there was something else. In the center of the map, there was a drawing of an old, massive oak tree, far more detailed than any other landmark. Next to it was a series of numbers and a short, cryptic phrase. "Where the giant sleeps, his roots hold the deepest secrets." I knew I had to find that tree. The snow was a problem, deep and soft, making a trek through the woods difficult and dangerous. I needed supplies. I needed snowshoes. I needed to go into town. I found an old toboggan in the barn, and after 2 days of waiting for the snow to harden slightly, I made the 10-mile journey to Silver Creek. It was exhausting but exhilarating. Pulling the toboggan down the winding road, the only sounds were my own breathing and the hiss of the runners on the snow. I felt like the only person on earth. Silver Creek was welcoming in a quiet, reserved way. The woman at the general store, a kind-faced woman named Mary, seemed to know who I was before I even introduced myself. "You're Elias's boy," she said, a warm smile crinkling the corners of her eyes. "We all wondered when you'd show up. He was so proud of you, you know. He'd come in here sometimes and just talk about his grandson in the city, said you were smart and strong." Her words were another balm on the old wound of my loneliness. I bought snowshoes, more kerosene, and some fresh food. As I was checking out, a man in a crisp suit entered the store. He looked completely out of place, his polished city shoes slipping on the snowy floor. "I'm looking for the Novak property," he said to Mary, his voice smooth and professional. "I represent Northwood Holdings. We'd like to speak with the new owner." Mary's smile vanished. She glanced at me, a flicker of warning in her eyes. "He's not here," she said coolly. The man's eyes scanned the store and landed on me. He took in my worn coat, my muddy boots. I could see the dismissal in his gaze. He couldn't possibly imagine I was the owner. "Well," he said, handing Mary a business card, "when you see him, tell him Mr. Larson is in town. We're prepared to be very generous. It would be a shame for him to miss such an opportunity." He gave me one last indifferent glance and left the store. The air in the store felt tense after he left. "You watch out for them," Mary warned, her voice low. "They've been trying to get their hands on this whole valley for a decade. Elias was the last holdout. He said they were poisoning the land and he wouldn't sell for any price. Her words confirmed everything my grandfather had written. The fight was real and it was here now. I thanked her, loaded my supplies onto the toboggan, and began the long trek back home, my mind racing. Mr. Larson's presence was an accelerant. I didn't have time to waste. The next day, I put on the snowshoes and set out to find the giant oak. With the map in hand, I headed deep into the woods behind the house. It was slow going. The snow was thigh-deep in places, but the forest was beautiful, serene. The only sounds were the crunch of my snowshoes and the cawing of crows. After nearly 2 hours of hiking, following the contour lines on the map, I found it. The tree was immense, far larger than any other tree in the forest. Its branches, heavy with snow, spread out like the arms of a sleeping titan. It was ancient, majestic, and it stood in a small natural clearing. Where the giant sleeps, the map said. This had to be the place. I searched the base of the tree, digging through the snow, looking for any sign of disturbed earth, a hidden marker, anything. I found nothing. I spent hours circling the tree, my frustration mounting. The sun began to dip below the ridge, casting long blue shadows across the snow. I was cold, tired, and defeated. As I leaned against the massive trunk to catch my breath, my eyes fell upon the cryptic phrase on the map again. His roots hold the deepest secrets. Roots. I had been looking on the surface. My father's clue was about what lay beneath. But how could I dig through frozen ground? Then I noticed something. On the south side of the tree, where the winter sun would hit most directly, there was a large exposed root as thick as my body that snaked out from the trunk before dipping back into the earth. And near the trunk, sheltered by the massive root, the snow was much shallower. There was a patch of ground, maybe a few feet square, that was almost bare. I knelt down and cleared the remaining snow with my hands. The ground was cold, but not frozen solid. It was protected by the tree. I took out the small hand trowel I had brought with me and began to dig. The digging was hard work. The soil was dense with smaller roots and rocks. But after about a foot, the trowel hit something hard with a dull thud, not a rock. It was a flat, metallic sound. My heart hammered against my ribs. I dug faster, my fingers raw with cold, scraping away the dirt. I uncovered the edge of a metal box, much larger and heavier than the one I'd found in the hearth. It was an old, military-style footlocker, sealed with 2 heavy latches. It took all my strength to haul it out of the hole. It wasn't locked. I knelt in the snow, the cold forgotten, and with trembling hands, I lifted the latches. The contents were wrapped in oilcloth to protect them from the damp. I carefully unwrapped the package. This was it. This was my father's legacy. This was the truth. The first thing I saw was the ledger. It was a detailed accounting book, its pages filled with neat columns of figures. A handwritten note was clipped to the front. This is a record of the bribes, the illegal dumping fees paid to shell companies, the whole crooked operation. It was given to me by a man on the inside. He was afraid for his life. He was right to be. The next items were the photographs. They were grainy, black and white shots, clearly taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. They showed trucks with the Northwood logo on the side, late at night, dumping barrels into a ravine that I recognized from the map as being just a few miles upstream from my property. Then there were the documents, stacks of them. Internal Northwood memos detailing the cost-saving benefits of avoiding proper waste disposal, geological surveys falsified to show the ground was stable and non-porous, and most damning of all, a series of lab reports. These were my mother's contribution. They showed a side-by-side analysis of water samples taken upstream from the dumping site and downstream. The downstream samples were filled with a cocktail of toxic heavy metals, and carcinogens at levels hundreds of times higher than what was legally permissible. It was irrefutable proof. They were knowingly, systematically poisoning the water supply for the entire region, all for the sake of profit. At the very bottom of the box was one last thing. A personal letter, not from my grandfather, but from my father. It was written to me. "My dear Leo," it started, his handwriting so different from Elias's, bolder, more hurried. "If you are reading this, it means your grandfather has succeeded in keeping you safe, and that we have failed. I am so sorry for the life you must have had. I am sorry we weren't there to see you grow. I want you to know that every risk we took for you. We wanted to leave you a better world, a cleaner world, a world where people can't get away with this kind of evil. We were trying to build a future for you here in this valley, on this land that has been in our family for generations." I had to pause, my vision blurring with tears. I could almost hear his voice, feel his passion, his righteous anger. "This evidence is our legacy. It's a dangerous inheritance, I know. Your grandfather will want you to be safe. He will tell you that you can walk away, and you can. You owe us nothing. You have already paid a price you never should have. But if you have it in your heart, if you have our family's stubborn fire in your blood, use this. Don't let them win. Don't let our deaths be for nothing. Whatever you do, know that we love you more than words can say. Your loving father, Thomas Novak." I sat there in the snow, in the fading light of the afternoon, holding the letter to my chest. The choice my grandfather had offered me was now laid bare in all its terrible clarity. On one side was Mr. Larson, with his business card and his generous offer, a life of ease and security, bought with silence. On the other side was this box, this heavy, cold metal box filled with truth, a legacy of justice that had already cost my parents their lives. My father's words echoed in my head, "Don't let them win." The cold wasn't just in the air anymore. It was a cold, hard knot of fury in my stomach. They had taken everything from me, my parents, my childhood, my history, and now they were sending men in suits to offer me money to forget. There was no choice. Not really. Not for a boy with Elias's stubbornness and Thomas's fire in his blood. I closed the footlocker, the latch clicking shut with a sound like a promise. I would not let them win. I would finish what my parents started. I dragged the heavy box back to the toboggan and began the long journey home. Under a sky full of stars, I was only just beginning to learn. The weight on the toboggan was immense, but the weight in my heart felt lighter. I finally had a purpose. I had a fight. My fight. Getting the footlocker back to the house was a monumental effort. The sun had set completely by the time I stumbled onto the porch, my muscles screaming in protest, my lungs burning from the cold air. But the exhaustion was secondary to the current of adrenaline humming through me. I dragged the box inside and set it by the hearth, its cold metal a stark contrast to the warm, dancing firelight. For a long while, I just sat there, looking at it. It was the physical manifestation of my entire life story, a story of love, sacrifice, and a deep, hidden evil. It was both a tombstone and a weapon. I knew I couldn't do this alone. My grandfather's letters were my guide. My father's evidence was my ammunition, but I was still just an 18-year-old kid who had spent his life in an institution. I knew nothing about legal battles or confronting powerful corporations. I needed an ally. My mind immediately went to Mr. Davies. He had been kind, pragmatic, but he had also advised me to sell. He saw the homestead as an asset, a problem to be liquidated. Would he be willing to see it as a cause, to risk his reputation, maybe even more, to take on a client like Northwood Holdings? It was a long shot, but it was the only one I had. There was no phone at the homestead, of course. The next morning I made the trek back into Silver Creek. This time I didn't take the toboggan. I walked, my mind racing, rehearsing what I would say. I felt a new sense of urgency, a feeling of being watched. Mr. Larson was in town. He knew a new owner existed. It was only a matter of time before he found me. When I reached the general store, Mary gave me a knowing look. "He was in again yesterday," she said quietly, "asking questions about the Novak place, about you." I nodded, my resolve hardening. "Can I use your phone?" I asked. "It's a long-distance call." She led me to a small office in the back of the store and closed the door, giving me privacy. I dialed the number for Davies and Finch from the letterhead I had kept in my pocket. A crisp, professional receptionist answered. I asked for Mr. Davies, giving my name. I was put on hold for what felt like an eternity. I could hear the faint classical music they played, a sound from another world, a world of glass towers and mahogany desks. Finally, his voice came on the line, tinged with surprise. "Leonardo, is everything all right? Have you come to your senses about that offer?" "Mr. Davies," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I'm not selling. I'm not ever selling. But I do need your help. I found something here, something my father left behind." I took a deep breath. It's evidence, proof that Northwood Holdings murdered my parents. There was a long, dead silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint crackle of the connection, the sound of him breathing. I imagined him in his expensive office looking out at the city, a world away from this dusty back room in a general store. "Leonardo," he finally said, and his voice had lost all its weary pragmatism. It was sharp, focused, and deadly serious. "Don't say another word over the phone. Don't talk to anyone. Are you safe?" "I think so," I said. "For now." "Stay put," he commanded. "I'm coming to you. I can be in Silver Creek by tomorrow afternoon. Is there a place we can meet? A motel?" "There's a diner," I said. "The Silver Spoon." "I'll see you there, 3 o'clock. And Leo," he added, his voice low and urgent, "bring everything you found, and for God's sake, be careful." The line went dead. I hung up the phone, my hand trembling slightly. It was real. He had believed me. The fight was on. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I returned to the homestead, my senses on high alert. Every snap of a twig in the woods, every gust of wind rattling the window panes sent a jolt of fear through me. I kept the footlocker hidden, tucked back into its hole beneath the hearthstone. I felt like a guardian, a keeper of a sacred trust. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the fire, reading through my father's journal. It wasn't just about the investigation. It was filled with his thoughts, his hopes, his love for my mother, his excitement about my impending birth. I learned that he loved to fish in the creek behind the house, that my mother had planted the wildflower garden that was now choked with weeds by the porch. I was getting to know them, page by page, and with every word I read, my determination grew into a cold, unshakable rage. They hadn't just killed 2 people, they had stolen a family, they had stolen my life. The next day, I packed the contents of the footlocker carefully into my canvas bag. It was heavy, weighed down by the truth. I walked the 10 miles to town, a journey that was becoming familiar, my path worn into the snow. I arrived at the Silver Spoon Diner an hour early. It was a cozy place with red vinyl booths and a long formica counter. I ordered a coffee I couldn't afford and waited, my bag resting on the seat beside me like a silent partner. At precisely 3 o'clock, a black sedan, caked in road salt and mud, pulled up outside. Mr. Davies got out. He looked different here. His expensive suit seemed out of place, his city pallor more pronounced. He looked older, more tired than he had in his office. He slid into the booth opposite me, his eyes immediately going to the bag. He ordered a coffee from the waitress, his voice quiet. "Let's see it," he said once she was gone. I hesitated for a moment, then slid the bag across the table. He opened it, and for the next hour, in the quiet corner of a roadside diner, he examined the legacy of Thomas and Sarah Novak. He read the ledger. He studied the photographs. He meticulously went through my mother's lab reports. His face, as he read, was a mask of concentration, but I could see a muscle twitching in his jaw. The kind, weary lawyer was gone, replaced by a sharp, formidable legal mind at work. Finally, he stacked everything back into a neat pile. He looked up at me, and his eyes were filled with a profound sadness and a new, deep respect. "Your father was a brilliant man," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And a brave one. I knew him, you know." "Not well. He came to me for some preliminary advice when he was starting this investigation. I told him he was crazy. I told him to be careful. I told him Northwood would crush him." He shook his head, a look of regret on his face. He didn't listen. Thank God he didn't listen. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "This," he said, tapping the stack of documents, "this is a bombshell. It's more than enough to reopen the investigation into your parents' death. It's enough to launch a massive corporate criminal case. It's everything." "So you'll help me?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He gave me a wry, sad smile. "Help you? Leonardo, I've been a corporate lawyer for 40 years. I've helped rich men get richer and powerful men stay powerful. I've defended companies that I knew were cutting corners, that I knew were hurting people, all in the name of profit. It's how I paid for my fancy office and my tailored suits. I haven't done something that truly mattered in a very long time." He reached across the table and put a hand on my shoulder. "It would be the greatest honor of my career to help you burn them to the ground." In that moment, the gap between us, the age, the wealth, the experience, vanished. We were just two men, allied in a cause that was bigger than both of us. A cause that had been waiting, buried in the frozen ground, for 16 years. "What's our first move?" I asked. "Our first move," he said, a grim smile on his face, "is to disappear. We can't file this from here. Northwood has this town in its pocket. Their man Larson is already sniffing around. We need to get this evidence to the state attorney general's office directly, and we need to make sure you're somewhere safe when we do it." He explained the plan. He would drive me and the evidence back to the city that night. He had a small apartment he kept, a place no one knew about. We would work from there, preparing the case. He would leak the story to a trusted journalist, a friend of my father's, to ensure it couldn't be buried. It was a whirlwind of logistics and legal strategy that left my head spinning. As he spoke, I looked out the window of the diner. Gus's old pickup truck rumbled past. Mary was sweeping the steps of the general store. The snow had started to fall again, blanketing the small, quiet town, and I felt a sudden, sharp pang of loss. I had only just found this place, this home, and now I had to leave it. "What about the homestead?" I asked. "We can't just leave it." "It will be fine," Mr. Davies assured me. "Northwood can't touch it while the estate is in probate, and once this story breaks, they'll have much bigger problems to worry about than one piece of land." He was right, I knew, but leaving felt like a betrayal. It felt like running. I thought of my grandfather's words, "The land will teach you patience, resilience, and strength." I had only just begun my lessons. "I'm not going," I said, the words surprising me as much as they did him. Mr. Davies stared at me. "Leo, this isn't a discussion. It's not safe for you here." "This is my home," I said, my voice gaining strength. "My grandfather didn't run. My parents didn't run. They fought for this place. I'm not going to hide in some city apartment while you fight for me. This is my fight. I'm staying here." I could see the arguments warring on his face, the lawyer's caution against the man's respect. He saw the look in my eyes, the stubborn set of my jaw that he had once attributed to my grandfather. He sighed, a long, deep breath. "You're just like him," he said, a note of admiration in his voice. "All right, we do it your way, but you won't be alone." He picked up his phone. "I have a friend, a retired private investigator. He owes me a favor. He's tough as nails. I'm going to have him come up here and stay with you. Not as a bodyguard, but as a neighbor. Northwood won't try anything obvious, but I don't want you out there alone." And so the plan was modified. Mr. Davies would take copies of all the evidence back with him to the city to begin the legal assault. The originals would stay with me, hidden. My new neighbor would arrive in a few days. I would stay on my land, the quiet, unassuming air, while a storm of justice gathered on the horizon. As Mr. Davies prepared to leave, he handed me a thick envelope. "This is a retainer," he said before I could protest, "from me for expenses. Consider it the first investment in our case." It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. "You're going to need supplies, and maybe a decent bed," he said with a small smile. "And Leo," he added, his expression turning serious again, "call me every day. If I don't hear from you for 24 hours, I'm sending the cavalry." I nodded. We shook hands, a silent pact passing between us. I watched his black sedan drive away, heading back to the world of concrete and steel, leaving me in the quiet heart of the valley, the guardian of its secrets, ready for the fight of my life. The road ahead was uncertain and dangerous, but for the first time I felt I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I was home.